Maybe you could comment on this idea of if we're largely sort of reincarnating together as a society, and it seems like if you look back in history, there are lessons from history that we keep trying to learn, and
Right.
we haven't yet. And again, today there's lots of lessons available to us. Yeah, could you maybe talk about just time cycles and like how we can sort of collectively learn lessons?
Well, absolutely. That's a beautiful question. And I would say there certainly are major cycles that seem to come up. In fact, I can tell you as a scientist, I've become far more interested in astrology since I read Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, because he talks about such vast cycles. And they become apparent, for example, in the history of nations and of ethnic groups over long time scales. And you start to realize that there seems to be a lot to this cyclicity. I would argue that overall, I see that there is some evolution, but that in many ways is postulating kind of an optimism that I have that this awakening we're talking about of the primacy of consciousness, that we're all in this together, that awakening is truly happening. And that does allow me to be optimistic about where the world is headed. And I would say that that cycle, if we're able to break out of the kind of cycling that we've seen in human history repeating itself, and wars and imperialism and all these different major kind of movements of humanity over the last few millennia, I would say we're looking at about a 5,000 to 8,000 year cycle that we're actually about to break free from. That is, we've struggled and wrestled within these millennia, trying to come to a deeper understanding of our relationship with the universe. And in many ways, my thinking on this comes from an acknowledgement that so much of where the modern science of consciousness, which incorporates quantum physics and incorporates philosophy of mind and the hard problem of consciousness, all the evidence for non-local consciousness out of parapsychology, that consilience of information is leading us into entirely new territory that, interestingly enough, resembles the kind of pinnacle of thought reached by spiritual leaders, both East and West, millennia ago, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Oneness, this binding force of love, these incredibly kind of rich, big picture concepts that come from the very bookends of life, things like death and rebirth and what's going on with these cycles and with human experience around all that. And what we're coming to realize is that those spiritual leaders in many ways were right on the beam at the very beginning. I remember reading the Tao of Physics back when I was, my early 20s, and being very impressed with this kind of connection he made, Fritjof Capra, between Taoism and Chinese philosophy and modern physics. And other people have made similar kind of analogies, but more recently, people go into more depth about contributions of people like Pythagoras. And we start to understand that there was some rich understanding way back at the beginning that in many ways matches up to the best that we can do today in trying to describe the kind of pinnacle of human achievement in science and philosophy in terms of understanding the nature of reality. But I believe that this awakening is a huge part of it, that we've had thousands of years for religious systems which were based on the messages of prophets and mystics who had glimpsed these spiritual, non-material realms. But then the universe upped the ante back in the late 60s. So instead of this tiny trickle of people who died and then came back to this world, by cardiac resuscitation techniques in modern medicine, you've got tens of millions who have now been to the other side and come back to tell the tale. Now, many of them, of course, are not ready to tell that tale because it's shocking. It's unexpected. They might think they're going crazy, especially like when I told my doctors, try to tell my doctors about my experience. They just said, your brain was soaking in pus. We have no idea how you're even coming back to us. But you can forget about it because a dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. And I bought what they said. We buy into our doctors' teachings. And at that time, I had not had much return of my neurosurgical, neuroscience, medical knowledge at all. I had to wait a month or two for all that to trickle back in. But anyway, it's just kind of an extraordinary awakening, I think, coming to humanity now that I think will break us out of the cycle of that false sense of buying into the materialist illusion. And it's a beautiful story to tell and share because it is so hopeful and optimistic for the future of humanity at large.
Yeah, wonderful.